Hi, welcome to Built in the Bush. My name's Tanya Atkinson. I'm an executive coach and growth and transition facilitator. And one of the absolute privileges that I get in my job is I get to hear the personal stories of how people got to be where they are today and what made them successful, and how sometimes the things that went wrong are really the things that went right for us and set us up to be where we are today. The whole point of the podcast is to share those ups and downs, to share their personal stories, but also to hopefully give you the inspiration and the motivation to realise that you can follow your dreams and your purpose. There are way too many different jobs in this world and way too many different people for us to be doing a job that we don't enjoy most of the time. So without further ado, let's get into it. Welcome, Julia Spicer, to Built in the Bush. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Tanya. I'm very excited to be here with you.
I'm excited to hear a bit of your story and how you got to doing the wonderful things you are today. I might let you introduce yourself, though, as to how we first met each other, and then how you summarise what you do today before we jump into some of the questions.
Yeah, absolutely. So not dissimilar to you, as a country kid, I started at small schools north of Roma, where I grew up. My family was on a sheep and cattle property north of Roma in Western Queensland. And as what happens to most country kids, at some stage we all end up going off to boarding school, which is where we crossed paths. And so I went to boarding school in Toowoomba. I was lucky enough when I finished high school to do a Rotary exchange and spent a year in Switzerland. So, you know, really similar to the back blocks of Roma. So it was certainly an experience, and certainly some good life lessons that came from that we might end up talking a bit more about as we go through this conversation. But my background is in environmental science, and so it is a bit of a leap these days from what I studied at Gatton at the University of Queensland in a natural resource management degree, working in sort of sustainable agriculture and often lots of extension roles with industry, through to now what I do around kind of business support, regional economic development, helping people take ideas through to action. And really that's been in the last 13 odd years, Tanya, that I started my consulting business. And again, like what often happens in smaller communities, I kind of didn't want to stay where I was working and had worked for a not-for-profit for many years. I wanted to stay living in Gundawindi, and there weren't any other jobs. So that was the very strategic way in which my business had to begin. So there was a lot of saying yes to really anything at that stage. But over time, you know, and over a decade or more now, being able to be really clear around where I think I can add value to situations. So from a summary perspective around what I do now, I guess I talk a lot about how I work with not-for-profit and industry groups in the strategy space, helping them work out what it is that they want to do and really how they're going to do that.
So you touched on it a bit already in the story. So were you built in Roma? Were you born in Roma?
It was my dad's family property that we all grew up on. I had a couple of my early years in Brisbane. So my parents were both high school teachers by trade. Dad had gone away to do study and have an off-farm income as well. And so we moved back to the farm when I was 5. And then, the rest of my childhood and adulthood was there. And we sold the family farm during COVID. So we sold it in 2021.
Yep. So you don't go back to Roma much then?
Oh, still certainly. Yeah. Still very connected to that community, and certainly very connected to the Bymount community where we grew up. It's one of those communities with a, one teacher school on the side of the road and the hall and the tennis courts, and it's a really beautiful community, and certainly still stay very connected to families that, other families that grew up there as well. So, it's a great part of the world. So certainly still very connected to it, but definitely called Gundawindi home these days, and have done for maybe nearly 20 years, I think.
Yeah. Yep. That's not going to change in any time soon.
No.
And so Stabledat, you went to boarding school. Which boarding school did we go to?
Yeah, sorry. So we were at Downlands. So I went to boarding school at Downlands. And I mean, that was a really great, I found that a really great experience. It was one of those things, there hadn't been others in my family who had done the boarding school thing prior to me going. I was not particularly super pumped on going to a single, going to an all-girls school, and there were a lot of buy-mount families where the boys were already there, so at least I would be walking into an environment where there were some familiar faces and people there. I think it was at a time where there were, it was pretty new to the girls being boarders at the school. And as you will maybe remember, you're a few years younger than me, but I think it was an interesting time in terms of looking at how they needed to deal with the fact that they had these females around all of the time, and what needed to be considered or maybe be changed as a result of that.
You'd be very surprised to see the rules with males and females boarding at Downlands now. All those areas that used to be out of bounds for the girls are no longer the case.
I think boarding school is the most, it's the most amazing opportunity for those who can do it. And I know that's not going to be for all families. But you'd also be the same. I mean, my best friend at Downlands is still my best friend now. I'm the godmother of her daughter who's turned 18 and gone to London, and, I get the messages not dissimilar to any of the other family members. So I think it is beautiful in making the world such a smaller place. And I think in this day and age where there's so much going on and there's so many kind of things that you can get really upset about, to have a place where, you really grow as adults with other people around you. It was very much a family environment when we were there. And I'm sure it still is today. I've got nieces and nephews and other family friends with kids at boarding school. And, I think the ability to, at a young formative age, meet people from a whole range of backgrounds, other countries, other family dynamics, I think that's just so important if we're wanting to really build empathetic generations of humans, basically.
Yeah, and you don't know what you don't know, so you don't get growth or know other ways of doing things if you're not exposed to it, do you?
Yeah, absolutely.
So stabled at Downlands, where would you consider you debuted at? What was sort of was it the exchange program, or was it a certain role that you really came into your own and you feel like that sort of set you up for where you ended up today?
Yeah, it's really interesting, Tanya, and it's a good opportunity to reflect when we have these kinds of conversations. So as I said, I did the Rotary exchange to Switzerland. So I went to a French high school, a Swiss French high school for the year again.
Did you speak French already?
I had learned French. I wouldn't have said that I spoke it. My mum was a languages teacher, so when we were all at school, she didn't care what subjects we did as long as we did a language. So you can imagine we all thoroughly enjoyed learning a language because that was the one thing we were told we had to do. So note the sarcasm in my voice. So all of a sudden I land in the middle of Switzerland. I'm like, oh, geez, Mum might have been on the money with this.
Right probably about that one.
Yeah, I might have if I'd have just done a little bit more. So I lived with Swiss German families, and I went to a Swiss French high school. So that in itself was pretty unique. And I mean, so lucky that everybody in the world speaks English, and to be fair, a lot of them much better than I speak English. So that was always going to be okay. But it was a great opportunity to really be immersed in a pretty special culture and in a pretty special country. And so I've stayed very connected to the families. I lived with two families over there, and I've stayed connected with both of those. I've had sisters come and visit here. I've gone back for weddings. It was a pretty amazing experience. But what it really did teach me at the ripe old age of 17 was I rock up at this high school and I barely speak the language, and nobody cared that I was Julia Telford from Bymount, or that I'd been the school captain at Downlands, or that I was incredibly funny, or whatever I thought I was, because their life has kicked along quite pleasantly without me. And so I needed to think about how I was going to show up to them and how I was going to contribute in this environment, because the reality was their world would keep turning and I would either have a really good experience or I'd be incredibly lonely for the year because I couldn't engage, and that was what I wanted to be able to do. And so for me, it was
big
really
questions for a 17-year-old though.
Yeah, it really was. I still to this day think about that year being like holding your life in a crystal ball in your hand kind of thing, and thinking about actually nobody cares what I've done or how I've showed up here. It will only be what I do with these people that they will care about. And so that was quite leveling and quite good to have that bit of ego knocked out of me early. And meant that it was up to me to really show up and do something. And I think those lessons really early on have certainly, played out in other ways and really helped me think about this piece of contribution. From then on. So no, I will really take that as, it was an amazing travel year and culturally and all of the rest of it. But that piece of who I am right in this minute is actually all that matters. And the rest that I thought was very exciting and important really doesn't count for very much just at the moment.
That's a very humbling insight and experience particularly for anyone, but particularly for a 17-year-old. So then were you always going to do the university course that you did, or?
So I finished, as I said, I sort of graduated from year 12. I can't even remember what we had back then. Was it OPs? It feels like it's changed 57 times. Anyway, OPs, whatever the number thing was, I got the number. I'd been accepted into university and deferred for a year. And I was pretty sure that was what I wanted to do, but I also had a year to kind of work that out. And by the end of the year, I was looking forward to coming home and looking forward to getting into that next stage. So, yes, I did go off to uni, still doing the thing that I thought I was going to do, which was this sort of natural resource management, sustainable agriculture. And that was a 4-year degree. I guess if I was thinking about it, and back in those days, I'm so old, back in those days, graduating in early 2000s, the job that I thought I would end up with was as a national park ranger, actually. That was really what I kind of was angling to do, was to work for national parks. And I did 6 months of that as part of an industrial placement in my final year of uni. And I didn't hate it, but I didn't love it. And I could see the frustrations that people had and realised pretty quickly that actually that was really good, that in 6 months I worked out that wasn't actually what I wanted to do. And ended up then more in extension officer type roles, so industry development, working with groups of farmers to help them identify what they want to be doing and things like that. So I did that first of all with the horticulture industry, so actually based in Brisbane, and worked for Queensland fruit and veggie growers, so worked with vegetable producers across Northern Australia. And that was really around how they would spend their levy money. So the levies that they paid every time they sold a box of carrots or a box of lettuce went into a fund, and then it was up to a group of producers to help prioritise and identify what we would spend their levy funds on. And so my role was to help facilitate and identify some of that, which was an amazing role to have straight out of university. And
a great learning experience for what you're doing now,
amazing,
facilitating.
Amazing. In an industry that I had not one bit of knowledge about, off to the Diseases in Carrots conference I went, and the National Lettuce Conference, and all of these activities that were going on nationally. It was the beginning of the Vietnamese grower groups popping up in Australia. So we were doing a whole lot of work around literally getting, integrated pest management posters translated so that new farmers to the country knew what bugs were good bugs and what bugs were bad bugs, and what chemicals they should be spraying, and all sorts of, it was
that you would have never even thought about.
Incredible really couple of years. Amazing. Incredible couple of years. And just, I think, you and I have both worked across the agricultural industry for lots of our life. and anybody who produces food and fibre, I think, is pretty amazing. I think the horticulture industry is next level in terms of the margins, the challenges, the extremes in which they're often working in, and some of the global challenges that they have. It was such a great experience to have such intimate knowledge or intimate working with an industry that was completely foreign to me at that stage. It was really cool.
Yeah, and it is an impressive industry too. There's just so many layers to it. Like all
and
industries.
The R&D and the way in which farmers were and growers were implementing, top of the line European machinery and looking at efficiencies. This is 25 years ago. Was so impressive. So impressive.
Yep. And so then, how did that catapult you to your next role, or was that?
Well, look, I'm not going to lie to you, Tanya. It was somewhere between the diseases in carrots and the something or other conference. I was like, I have no horticulture background. I am very conscious. I'm in lots of conversations talking about tens of millions of dollars with no real technical background to this. And so I got to a point in the project that I was working on where I was like, I either need to do some horticulture study so I know what I'm talking about, or I need to set this up for the next person, get them funding for the role for the next 3 years, do the things that need to be done, and I need to bounce to what I actually kind of knew, which was the natural resource management. And so I did the latter. I got them funding for the role for another 3 years. We got it all set up again so that somebody else could come in and take the role. And I applied
for. You paid it forward before you left.
Yeah.
Left it in. Yeah. Always.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I took a role in Mitchell in southwest Queensland, and I headed out there to be the land care coordinator for their for the Mitchell and District Land Care Group. So this time it's about 2003, I think. And I spent 3 years living in Mitchell, working for a volunteer committee of landholders out there as their land care coordinator.
Yep. And so then to Gundy, was it, from Mitchell?
Yeah, so I think by about 2006, I'm going to say it was, there was a drought, one of the many droughts that we know we have across Australia. And I actually ended up going home and helping Mum and Dad for a little while on the farm. And while I was doing that, I was offered a short-term contract down here in Gundawindi to work with the Natural Resource Management Group down here and manage a project and some staff for them while they had somebody off doing another role. And so I was doing that as well as working for Mum and Dad and backwards and forwards a little bit. And the contract that they had offered me, they kind of kept extending. And it got to a point where really they paid better than Dad, to be honest. And I was really at a point where I was like, I love working for you. I actually need to continue to have an income. And so I think after maybe my 1 month contract being extended to about 6 or 8 months, I made the move and moved down here and based myself. And at that stage ran the catchment office for them. So we had a mixture of other land care coordinators and technical officers in weeds and pests and vegetation management and all of those kinds of topics. And so there was about 20 of us that worked across the Border Rivers catchment, so sort of Stanthorpe to St. George, working with groups of landholders, working with local council, working with traditional owner groups around natural resource management, sustainable ag at a catchment scale. So how are we going to solve some of these problems that we all had individually on our farms? How are we going to solve them together? And equally, where there were opportunities, how could we leverage that and really work together as a group to get some greater outcomes? And I did, I worked in that space for another 10 odd years, really.
Mm-hmm. Before you started your business.
Yeah.
And so when you think about that journey from even childhood through to, say, starting your business initially, what are some of the, we always talk about successful failures. The whole idea of the podcast is that sometimes the things that feel like are going really wrong at the time are actually setting us up and redirecting us for bigger and better opportunities than we could have ever imagined or wished for. So are there any successful failures or things that come to mind for you during that journey that have set you up for where you're at today, and what was the learning and the growth from it?
So I'm not sure I would say it had set me up, but if I can, it certainly has. There's some scenarios that occurred early on that have played out multiple times. And I guess, again, we both know that regional Queensland's a small place. Regional Australia's pretty small. Everybody knows everybody. So sometimes I didn't realise what I've learned along the way is that in some of the situations I was in, and I'll explain them in a minute, how I handled that is actually what people remember 10, 20, 30 years down the track. And so whilst I didn't realise it then, that actually did more. In this circumstance, it worked out okay, but that's what my reputation has been remembered. That's the piece of my work that's been remembered reputationally. Yeah. So I've got an example where when I very first moved down to Gundawindi, one of the first things I had to do was go and tell a group of landholders that they weren't getting this money. They thought that they were going to be receiving millions of dollars, like $5 million worth of works that they'd been doing on their properties. And my first job was to go and tell them that wasn't the case.
So already started the works as well?
Oh, some of them had started the work, yep. Some of them had started the work. Whether they should have or not, it's a whole other conversation, but they'd started. They'd been led to believe this was going to happen. They'd been told things that they shouldn't have been told because people didn't want to say no, or they didn't feel comfortable, or whatever. So my first interaction with these landholders, they had never met me before. The first interaction they have with me is me coming to say, look, I'm so sorry. You've been promised things you shouldn't have been promised. I can't talk to the past. I can just tell you, what we need to do moving forward to try and fix some of this and get you some money and things like that. But basically, you're all waiting for a check from me, and that's not coming. So fairly stressful. I don't think, I don't get too nervous before things, but I do remember stopping on the side of the road and having a little vomit before I went to this meeting because I knew how people were going to react because we were in the middle.
Expectation was
we were in the middle of a drought, Tanya. People would have spent this money in their minds 3 times over. They thought they were getting reimbursed contour banks and waterways. They thought they were getting reimbursed kilometres and kilometres of fence. It was a mess. It was an absolute mess. And I felt that I was not getting support from my higher up bosses in the organisation to do this. I felt like I was getting fed to the wolves, but I also knew that we needed to, as quickly as possible, tell these landholders what was going on. And it was a heated meeting. It was, there was a lot of yelling and shouting and people were really upset.
Did you go on your own to it as well?
I had a manager with me who sat at the back of the room. But I was standing up in an old hall in Western Queensland.
Yeah, I've done it many times.
You can imagine. With a room,
and how many farmers or
there would have been 25, 30 people in the room, maybe 25.
That's a decent sized room of people that were expecting grant or funds to, So then how did you approach that? Or what did you learn from it?
So I've gone sort of clearly, this is what I know, this is what I understand of the situation to be. I can only imagine, you guys will have paid this money, you've spent it, it's this, it's that. This is what I need to tell you. I want to be really clear. I want to whatever. I was absolutely crapping myself whilst going through all of these points. And people were absolutely, understandably, really angry, and so I just needed to let people yell for a little while. It did get to the point where I had a couple of landholders in the room and a few of the older guys in the room, like the wise old, the elders of the community, basically stand up and speak to the room and say, we're kind of shooting the messenger now. This is not on her. We're all pissed off. We all know that this is wrong. We're all really frustrated, but probably keeping on yelling at this young bird at the front of the room's not going to be that helpful now. So I think we need to probably draw a line and keep moving. And
you must have just had a physical sigh of relief.
And those gents I still see to this day, right? Like I just moved to their community. It was working in my head how quickly I could pack and move back to Mitchell. No. But those gents, they really did save me in that meeting. And so one of the things for me was around, always being very respectful of the hierarchy in communities. So I always want to challenge the status quo. And at the same time, our communities do have a hierarchy. We do have some elders often in the community who can be the wise owls, who can be the voice of reason, who can whatever. And those guys really did sort of save me in this situation. And set a course then that meant we could kind of work through, and it took us months, but we did get some of the money and all of the rest of it. But I don't think we would have been able to do that if some of those guys hadn't have stood up in their own community and told some of the others, let's back off this one a little bit and let's try and work out what to do. And so I will always be appreciative of them stepping in and kind of not rescuing me in terms of a damsel in distress, but kind of just pulling everybody up for a minute and helping us take a breath. So I think that piece of, how do we make sure that those elders can kind of help bring reason when we're having some of these things. Yeah. But the other thing is, the other thing and the bit that I didn't see then that I have seen now is there were people in that room, so some of the others in the room who were really frustrated and angry and all of the rest of it, to this day will say to me, we still remember how you handled yourself in that meeting, and you were visibly, upset about what was going on, and you were visibly, trying to manage us all. But we'll never forget the way in which you did that, and we were really impressed by that. And I have flashes of horror from that meeting. I've managed to, but at the same time, that was really good to know that how even delivering that really tough message and even kind of trying to work through this challenging conversation, the way in which I held myself was such that people were impressed by that. That I spent some time thinking about. And I actually take that back, Tanya, to, growing up in our small community at Bournemount, the community that I grew up in, and we all did interact across the generations. We were, if we were young, we were still playing tennis with, I might have been 16, but my tennis partner at the, tennis comp on the weekend was 66. Or if we were doing events at the hall, didn't matter how old you were, your expectation was that you delivered a meal or you cleaned up afterwards or you whatever. And that intergenerational communication and expectation that I could hold a conversation with somebody, I think has been one of those things that maybe country kids, we all underestimate that a little bit, our ability to talk to elders and be respectful of elders when we're younger, when there's not that many of us in a community. I think that was one of the things over many years I realised was maybe a way in which I could show up. And I don't know your experience. I don't know what your experience is like, but I've often found it a real balancing act as a woman in a predominantly male industry. The extension world, there's a lot of women. There's a lot of women in extension officer roles, but we're often dealing with a lot of men. A lot of the, it's the male landholders that we're often dealing with more and all of the rest of it. And I've seen over the years how different women sort of manage that. You can fall into the act like a bloke and be really blokey. You can kind of try the flirty line. I've seen women kind of try and do, use that as a method to be able to work. And neither of those really worked for me. But at the same time, I didn't want to fall in, I didn't want to lose my sort of power in the room, and I didn't want to fall into act like the granddaughter or the niece or the daughter, so it's that real balancing act I think I've always had to be really conscious of in my work career. But I think the bit for me that I could always pull out of it was actually there was gendered elements to it, but there was actually a generational thing that I focused on more, which helped me make sure that I could show up with the knowledge and technical ability and whatever else I needed to in a conversation, and still be respectful of the older person, whether they were male or female, on the other side of the table. And so I kind of focused on that a little bit more, I think, which, whether that's worked or not all of the time, but certainly that was one of the ways in which I could kind of manage through some challenging situations or scenarios where it could have become a bit overwhelming. And just to be able to kind of really think about, right, well, what is it that we need to have out of this, and how do I not hand over all of my power in the first 2 minutes, but be able to be really clear about what my role is here to, deliver a workshop, give some bad news, whatever it was. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I think too, when you start with accountability and honesty as well, that automatically builds rapport and trust. So as nervous and as anxious as you were about delivering that news, clearly you still were upfront and genuine and honest with them in the way that you delivered that. And people definitely always respect that. But yeah, that I can see how that would have been a very useful lesson for later on. You just touched on something though that I'd like to just ask a couple more questions about. So that interesting one of, particularly in the agri space, but it's not just agri, but where it still is a male-dominated type room, or the decision makers tend to be at the top end. Curious how you balance that, because I know I still struggle between taking the seat at the table and being assertive, and then not doing that all the time though, so that other people get the chance to, and so that you're not that bossy BI, we won't say the word, that sometimes gets labelled. So how have you got around that balancing act, and what tools or systems do you use to help you sort of know when you're in those rooms? Or it's just about approaching that, finding those elders and starting with them?
Oh, look, I think it is a combination of a whole lot of things, and I think this is an ongoing work for me, basically.
Don't get me wrong, I don't expect you to have a silver bullet for this, because I don't think there is one yet.
No, I don't think there is one either. No. But I do think it is, for me, it is very important that I am really conscious of it all of the time. So I have ended up in some really amazing situations, and I have got there because both men and women put my name forward for something or other.
Yeah.
And I know who those people are, and I am always very grateful to them, and I know that they did that because they thought I was capable, and because they thought I would bring a different opinion or a different idea or something else to the table. And so I think it is really so a couple of the really practical things that I do, if I get asked to do something and I can't do it, I will always give them 2 or 3 other names. For me, they are always other women, and they're always regional women. And so it's not that we are all copy and paste the same, but I want to create more opportunities for more regional women to be able to get around tables. And so I don't need to do everything, and I can't do everything, but I know lots of other really capable women regionally who will be able to, who might like that opportunity. And so that
transferred credibility that you're automatically giving them by referring them as
correct.
an option.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. And so again, not that there's not fabulous fellas out there who couldn't do that role, and in some circumstances it may be that I'm also suggesting one of the guys who is in my network to do something, but more often I will skew to suggesting and referring other regional women to whatever it is that whatever it might be, a board or a job or a whatever, speaking gig, whatever it might be. And so I think that for me, there's a few things around, it's a bit of the abundance mentality kind of thing. There's plenty of work out there. I don't need to do it all or be it all for everybody. So over the years, I've been able to get clearer of what's the work I want to do, what's the work I think I can do well, and maybe can bring something different to the table around that. And if I don't think I can do those couple of things, well, I'm not the best person for the job. But I'll probably know somebody who is. And so I think that is part of that. We want good work done, really, and let's find the best person for that. And sometimes that will be me, and other times it'll be lots of other people as well. So I think, it's always over communication if we've never done it before, right? So, it looks like over representation for a little while until it's actually just really normal to have a whole heap of women at the table as well. So whilst ever there is only ever one, and you and I have probably been the one at some tables historically, that is a bit of extra work for us to, again, make sure that we're not overly emotional and we're not this and we're not all of the things that they think women are going to be when we get to the table and make decisions. And so, I mean, I use humour as a way to help other people feel comfortable. I don't really need it, but I will use humour to help other people feel comfortable. I use a few phrases so that it's really clear what my question is really asking. So, I'm asking a clarifying question here. Maybe I didn't understand this, but can I just clarify why we're blah, blah, blah?
Yep. Framing them
rather
really
than
clearly.
it looking like Julia thinks this is a terrible idea. So even if I do, I might phrase it so that it's a bit easier to manage and swallow. And I mean, again, I do that with my husband sometimes too. This isn't just on committees,
It's
when
just
we've done
communication at any
when
time
we've done a
sometimes.
lot of the work that you and I have done. We kind of. My family often says there's a fine line between manipulation and influence, and I have to make sure I use my powers for good. And I don't disagree with them because I think, I do walk into situations pretty clear on what the purpose of the conversation or the meeting is. What's the purpose of what we're doing? Why are we here? What do we think we're getting at toward, We need momentum and forward motion. That's why we agree to be on committees or take on jobs or do boards, is because we want to get stuff done. And the way that stuff gets done is often we need to, build a bit of momentum, make some decisions and get on with it. And so how to do that in a way that everybody feels safe and can kind of come along on that journey is I think, that is the role of some of us that have got some good skills in this space.
And I think I heard in there too the power of having supporters or advocates, my words, but you spoke about people and knowing who they are that put you up and who are advocating for you. That's certainly something I've learned in fact, when I was in the corporate world though, leader, I'd learn a lot of things how I didn't want to lead from, but one thing that he had said about that was that he said the further up the chain you go, the less support, they'll start falling away. And that's very true in the corporate world because it gets smaller up the top end. But it's important to find those supporters because they're still there and they're your best advocates and also they're good sounding boards as well, aren't they? They normally know you well. They can give you sort of good feedback, constructive feedback on things.
And they also care about the entirety of you, not just the work you. And I think that's really important. There's all of the conversations around work-life balance and all of the rest of it and how do you do it and what do you do and all of the rest of it. But I think this piece of, we actually show up as our whole selves all of the time, regardless of what we think we're doing and where we think we're going. And so often those supporters or advocates, they know who you are and they know what that means for, work person. Julia and personal Julia. And I think that's really important.
Definitely, yep. And then, so we'll go back to starting the business. So was that what you said you sort of took any jobs or a lot of jobs when you first started because the motivation was wanting to stay in Gundy? Did you have an idea, though, of what you wanted that business or that service offering to end up like, and does it look like what your initial idea was?
Yes. So my other successful failure, as you worded it before.
Oh, sorry.
No, was I ended up in a position where I was kind of at a crossroads with my boss, where there'd been a couple of instances where what he was asking me to do, I just was not doing. And to the point where I also managed a team and I was telling them not to do what he told us to do. So I had become a really naughty employee where I had a fair amount of power with my team. I didn't agree with what the manager was doing and had talked to him lots about that. But it got to a point where I was needed to leave. And I remember where I was standing when I was talking to him on the phone and needed to
Isn't that
made
funny
the call.
how I remember that when I left the bank. Yeah, sorry, keep going.
But I was really naughty. I had 20 people doing exactly the opposite of what I had been told for them to do.
But from
so
what
I was really
know of you, there would have been a good reason for that, or no, it was just
in my mind, to my value set and what I thought was important.
but not what you were employed.
Well, but at the end of the day, I was doing exactly the opposite of what my manager said. So, yes, at that stage, I'm sure I justified it in lots of different ways. But the reality was I needed to go. I wasn't going to change what I was doing. He wasn't going to change where he wanted to. Yeah, so I needed to go. So that really, kind of came at a that set me off on a kind of crossroads so I gave 3 months notice, and I finished. So I basically started my business in December 2012. So I'd given 3 months notice. I really didn't know what I was going to do. But I had a set of skills where I could run workshops, I could write grants, I could, rally people, I could do some bits and pieces of, a motley kind of crowd of skills that could do. And so in that 3 months, I sent a message out to some of my network and said, by December 2012, I'll be a gun for hire. I'm starting a business. I have a name and an ABN. That's basically it. If you've got work in early 2013 and you think I can help you, let me know. And, be grateful for you to, think of me if there's anything that's going on. That was pretty much, the message that I put out to people. And Tanya, I think that abundance and that generosity of spirit for people starting small businesses is amazing. And I believe that because that's what I received. So, from that message, at the end of 2012, I started 2013 with enough work to keep me going, and I've not ever looked back. So I know that that's potentially an exception, not the rule, and that others will start a small business and find it really hard to get those first couple of invoices paid or jobs done or whatever. I was incredibly grateful for the network. And it did mean that I did some random stuff. I remember I had to ring 20 agronomists from across New South Wales as part of a bit of research that they were doing, looking at, professional development. I ran some workshops for people. I did some work for some other land care groups around the region. I applied for some grants to be able to deliver work for other people so I could kind of, do some things there. I worked with lots of other people. So for me, again, it wasn't really about my business name or my name. It was about what was the work that I could do and how could I support. So I subcontracted to lots of people. And honestly, 13 years on, there'd be lots of people who know I've got a business but would have no idea what the name of it is. And I'm actually fine with that. They know how to contact me if they think I can help them. And
they know where you
and
add
that's
value.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, exactly. So in this day and age, we do, I really focus now on the strategy side of things. So how can I help people get clear on what it is that they want to do? I help them from a resourcing perspective. So how are you going to do that? Do you need external funding? Do you need to, be connected into government that might invest in this? Like, how are you actually going to resource this? And then I guess the other space that I've fallen into a little bit is around some of, kind of keynote speaking and getting messages out around key areas. And really, for me, it's around linking back to some of my personal goals, which is around really supporting viable and vibrant regional communities. So how can I tell stories of great, viable regional businesses that people might not expect to be based in a St. George or a Longreach or a Mount Isa? And how do we talk about, the fact that, we're not trees. We live in the regions because we want to live here. This is where we want to build businesses and families. We're not here because we're not smart enough or, wealthy enough to live anywhere else. That there's real benefit and a real vibrancy of being regionally based.
Living in those. Yeah, definitely. Do you remember what you wanted to be when you grew up?
Look, I actually wanted to be a vet. I wanted to be a vet, and then I realised I'd have to actually do a lot more work at school than I really wanted to do. So that was probably what sidelined me into sustainable ag. Look, let's face it, I am somewhat of a born performer, so I get to do a bit of that in my day job these days. I wanted to, there's lots of things that I wanted to do, and if I look back, in some different ways, I am doing all of them. So I'm very I have created sometimes through actually, doing it, and other times by chance a little bit. I'm really, content with the life that I've created.
And that's another reason why I wanted to have you as a guest on here too, because you're quite often the business owners, or most of the ones I work with, they've created a successful, financially viable business, but they no longer have a life, and the business runs them and their life and those sorts of things. So it's refreshing to meet and talk to other business owners that can create a business that works for them. Because I think there's so much opportunity out there for us to, we don't know what we don't know, but there's always little ways and little tricks and tools to tweak and change things so that your business should always work for you. Otherwise, what's the point?
Yes, correct. So as you know, at the end of 2017, I think it was, I got diagnosed with breast cancer, and so very quickly had to rejig a whole lot of things in my business.
Yeah,
and at that point, what I realised, I had one staff person then. So I've always had like an admin officer, finance, somebody who could help me with the logistics of all sorts of things.
Yep.
And at its peak, I think I had 5 or 6 people working for me in a range of, they were all women. A couple were full-time, some were part-time and days and project-based and all of the rest. But maybe there were 5 or 6 of us at the peak. And what I realised initially with the breast cancer diagnosis and operations and chemo and all of the rest of it was that I had built myself a job. I had not built a business. And I had a good income for a period of years. But when I was not working, there was no other income. There was nothing coming in. And that was a rude awakening at a time where I needed no extra stress.
When you're already dealing with the fact that you've got cancer and fighting it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I knew it was not going to be the end of me, but I knew that there were months where it was going to be very challenging for me to be able to do anything. And again, the power of amazing communities. I had some businesses that I worked for, some clients would say, well, just tell me how much we paid you last year and we'll pay you that in advance so you've got some cash flow and then you just do the work when you feel better. So I had a couple of clients say that to me. I had a few people where I had work on my plate that I needed to offload and get other people to do because the work still needed to happen. And they kind of almost gave me a bit of a retainer on that project, even though I wasn't really doing anything. But that was a bit of a thank you for the workload. Pretty amazing. It also actually, I'm about to undo any of the intelligence that anybody thought I might have had. I didn't realise, but I'd been paying for income protection insurance. I had a policy that meant I could actually claim some insurance whilst I was doing that. I have no recollection, Tanya, of ever signing up for that. So
That's amazing. What was it, with a home loan or something, or
I don't even
separate?
know.
Don't know.
I don't even
The
know.
universe was looking after
So
you.
embarrassed to admit it, but I can't not lie to you.
We can't be
And
across everything. Sometimes
so that did mean that could kick in and give me some income.
so that's going to take a financial load off, but knowing that you're still thinking ahead and how do I build this into a business?
And so the bit for me, so that was 2018, and what are we now, 2025? I think the bit for me over that time that I have constantly kind of kept coming back to is, what does success look like for me? What does success need to be for this business? I'm involved with a few different businesses. We've started and bought and sold and done lots of different bits and pieces because I love it. I love this space of small business in regional areas. And so for me, it's around, what does success actually look like? So my consulting business will never be a saleable business. It will live and die with me, and that's fine. I can use it as a vehicle to do lots of things that I want to be able to do. I can use it as a vehicle to help other people who might be needing some extra work, and I can channel work to them via me and all of the rest of it. So I'm very clear on what the vehicle of my consulting business is set up to do, but it will never be saleable. I'm also clear that in this day and age, it runs best and it runs most profitably when I'm the only one in it, me and an admin support role. So I don't need to have a team of 5 or 6 people to feel successful and to feel like a business person and all of the rest of it. And given my kind of portfolio approach to work at the moment with some boards and some other activities that I do where I have an income stream from that, having multiple people in my consulting business I was finding that incredibly stressful and not useful for any of us. And so I'll contract people in and out potentially, but the likelihood of me employing any more people again is probably unlikely, I reckon. I'll never say never, but that certainly wouldn't fit the way in which I want to work at the moment.
And the way that it's growing. Yep, that makes sense. It's more a thought leadership type business from the sounds of it, which is what mine is too, rather than bricks and mortar. But it's being clear on what does success look like for me. What are the projects and the things that I want to spend my time doing, and where can I add value to it? Is that what I'm hearing?
Absolutely. How much money do I need to bring in through this, through this channel? My husband Tony and I, we kind of talk about Tony and Julia Incorporated, and we know how much we need to how much we need to live and pay off debt and do the things. We know what we would like to have as a profit, and we know we have a few different ways that can happen. So his income, my business, we have a business hub here in Gundawindi, so we have an income from that, a few boards, I'm on council, so we know how to be able to do that. And if we need to ramp that up, I can do that. I can take on more work. And if for whatever reason we needed another $100,000, I could spin that up and make that happen. But I also know what happens if I work for too long, too hard, no rest, whatever, and that's not pretty for anybody. So so I think it is being really clear around. I think it's interesting in the startup space and in some of the more urban areas, the conversations we have around business. We sort of talk about unicorns and these billion-dollar businesses, and everybody's got to be, 10xing all of the time. And then we spend a lot of time talking about businesses going broke. And I don't think we talk about what the spectrum in between is. It's actually, what does it look like to have, no debt, good turnover, few different business. Like what do I get to? I'm not a unicorn. I'll never be a unicorn, but I'm a really happy koala. I don't know what that means, but I think it's the middle bit. We talk a lot about super success and we talk a lot about super failure. It's the bit in the middle I think we should really kind of focus on, because that's going to be different for everybody.
Where most business is actually
100%. 100%. You would talk to people all the time. I spend a lot of time talking to women and they're like, I want to be responsible for school fees. I want my business to cover school fees. Great. That's really good. We can work on that. I work 4 days a week somewhere else. I want to only work 3 days a week somewhere else, and I want to work 2 days for myself. Great, we can work on that. We do not need that. That gives us something that we can work towards and look at. I want off-farm income and I need it to generate this much. Great, we can do something about that. That gives us something. But if we're not clear on what success actually looks like, and not from an ego perspective, but from a life contentment perspective, I think that's the real thing. I have often struggled with people would say, "Oh, when's enough? You've got all these things on your plate and you're doing all of this stuff. When's enough?" And I find enough a really limiting word, and I really struggled with it for a long time because I felt like I was being told I couldn't do some of the things. I couldn't have some of the things.
You were hearing it as a no.
I was hearing it as a no, and I was hearing it as a blocker. And what I needed to do was talk about, am I content? That was the way I swapped that. Am I content in this moment with what we're doing now? And the answer was always yes, I am content. Will I be more or less content if I start this new project or do this new business or whatever it might be? But for me, when I could swap enough with content, that was a game changer for me. And I really could kind of step back a little bit and look at things, because what was happening was my enough wasn't the same as staff I had, my husband, other family members. So I was burning people out around me because I was racing at a quicker pace than everybody else.
And expecting everyone to keep up.
Just not even acknowledging that not everybody was as excited about these things as I was, basically. I was there for the challenge, but what it looked like was that I wanted all of these things and I wanted more. And it was never really about that. It was about the challenge of trying something and it succeeding. So it was a really interesting time just to kind of recalibrate around why were we doing what we were doing, and how was I making sure that my piece of that and what really fed my kind of soul was, was part of, was considered in that at least. And that reframe from enough to contentment really helped me unlock some things. And there might be people listening where just reframing some of this stuff could be really useful for them too.
Yeah, well, I've even I like that too, the contentment. So I talk about progress over perfection because I too am a striver that's had burnout and all the rest of it.
I see you.
Yeah. Hence another reason why when we get to over the grid, because in my one-on-one coaching, I've just come off a contract with some government and defence and corporate over the last couple of years. And it just astounded me. Like, I knew a lot of successful people had experienced burnout, etc., but I was blown away by 8 to 9 out of every 10 people. And these are highly accomplished, successful people in any metric you look at. And they're not talking about it because there's that stigma that that's still associated with it. And so trying to get it out there because we're all suffering alone. And things don't change if we don't bring it out into the light. So thank you for bringing that up.
No dramas.
That's a good segue though. So normally we have the question of what would you say to your 20-year-old self or your younger self? I like to flip that for this because the other thing with successful people and strivers is that we rarely stop to reflect and go, well, hang on, we've actually achieved some of the things that years ago we dreamed of and those types of things. So what would your younger self, your 20-year-old self, your 17-year-old self, whatever age you want to pick, what would they say if they could see you now and what you're doing and what you've achieved?
Yeah, that is a lovely question. I hope that what my younger self would say now is that my contribution to whatever community, my contribution has created positive ripples, that they can see that my younger self can see where my contribution to work, life, committees, whatever, in whatever way, so that my contribution, we can see where those positive ripples have expanded.
Yep. What would they be most surprised about, do you think, where you are today and what you're doing?
I think my younger self would be most surprised. Quite honestly, I think my younger self would be surprised that I am married and that I was in a long-term relationship and married. I think early on I didn't really think that would be something that would happen. And I never really expected that motherhood would be part of my story, which it's not in the sense of I haven't had my own children, but I have a stepdaughter, so my husband has a daughter and they've got a young family now. So I think my younger self would be pleasantly surprised about that. And I think they would be surprised, my younger self would be surprised at some of the rooms I've found myself in some of the in some of the tables that I've ended up around, which, are pretty special and incredible in terms of some of the, the government advocacy work and some of the various roles I've kind of done that have ended up around some pretty interesting and amazing stories. And I think I didn't really expect a country kid from Bournemouth to probably have some of those opportunities.
Be in those rooms and having a seat and a voice at those tables and decision making. That's very cool. Over the grid now, so a few bumpy questions. We all know it's a bit bumpy going over the grid. What gets you out of bed in the morning?
My alarm? No. The fact I know I'll have shit to get done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we've already touched on this, but so ever experienced burnout? We said yes to that. So how did you recover? What were some of your key things that were vital for you?
So medication is still part of my overall management of anxiety and depression. So I still, there's been a couple of times where I've talked to my doctor about, do I still need medication as part of my plan? And we always come back to the fact that we know it works and that would be a good thing. So certainly medication. I think it's also I'm more aware now of some of my triggers, and it doesn't mean I still sometimes don't learn the burnout bit, but I know if I don't get enough sleep, things get a bit wonky. I know that I need to surround myself with certain people, and I know if I'm pulling away from those people that I've got to just check in with myself around, how my mental health is. Yep. And I also have I have some visible physical things that go on if I'm getting really agitated and anxious. And so there's a small group of people around me who know those signs. And so often I'll be sitting in a meeting and I'll get a text from somebody on the other side of the table and they're like, your leg's jiggling, you're tapping the table, so they know the signs and they can help call me on that if I'm in a situation where I'm sort of got myself and I'm not – I'm sort of getting towards that bit of a close tipping point. Yep. They know, and they know that they have my absolute permission to, draw that to my attention because I've missed it.
Yep. Yeah, brilliant. Do you have a self-care routine, a daily self-care routine since?
Yeah, Tanya, I do, and I think this is my Achilles heel. I always need to make sure that I do it regularly. Consistency is probably my nemesis. So yes, I need to make sure that I can, it's the get out in nature. I need to feel the grass under my, I need to stand in the front yard and feel the grass under my toes. I need to, the sleep bit for me is actually one of my bigger triggers, because if And as I
Mine
get
too.
older and menopause and all of the fun stuff, that's a whole nother podcast. You know, sleep is probably my biggest thing I've really got to manage these days. I've become this old person that's got to pay attention to what I drink when and what time I've got to go to bed and all of the rest of it.
I don't even know if we can say that's an old person. Because my burnout was 10 years ago, and I've sort of been strict with all that because sleep was a big one for me. I realised early on. So I've been having to do some of those things for a while.
Good.
So it's not an old person thing.
Great, good. I'm glad.
How do you define success now? So we've touched on this slightly, but as at today, how do you define success for your life?
So success for me, you know, I've got some different metrics, so to speak. So we have some financial metrics. I kind of talked to that before. We know what we've got to, as a unit, we know what we need to have going on there. And so in some circumstances, it means that I don't have to work as hard as I have in the past, or I don't have to do as much physical work, you know, operational work to have that. Because we're clearer on just what it is that we need to live and do the things that we're doing. So that's one of the measures of success for me. I think for me at the moment, it's really around, I kind of have a few different pillars or whatever you want to call them, that's important for me to make sure that my time is spent across. So contribution to community is one of those for me. Like, am I contributing? Am I volunteering? You know, do I have a cause that I'm supporting? That for me is actually success. And because if I don't have time for that, where else is my time going? The impact through innovation is the pillar that I call it. And that's really looking at, you know, how are we moving the needle, this viability and vibrancy in the regions? How are we using innovation as a way to do that? And then for me, the other one around, like, how am I actually helping empowerment, access and equity for people? So if it's regional people, if it's women, if it's First Nations, like, there's a piece of work, again, paid or unpaid, that I want to do. And if I can over a month see that I've put time and energy into those kinds of pillars, then I know I'm on the right track.
Yep. What does regional Australia need more of to keep thriving?
We need more regional leaders at decision-making tables. Hashtag the connection table. No, we need more of us to use our voices and advocate for what it is. So I think there's 400 and something boards across state and federal governments. There's 2/3 of us, you know, a third of the country live in the regions. A third of us should be on those boards. You know, we know that health is an issue everywhere, but what does health in Gundawindi, how is health in Gundawindi different to health in Brisbane, and how are we making sure that people are making decisions for all of us, not just for the people that they know. So for me, that what the regions need to be able to do is make sure that we know who's making decisions for us, and that we can get our voices heard in those spaces.
Yep. What does the bush need more of in 2025?
I think in 2025, the bush needs more optimism, I would say. We have got everything we can. There's nothing that we can't do in the bush. If we can solve a problem in the bush, we've solved a global problem. There's more Gundawindis and Birdsvilles across the world than there are Sydneys and New York. So if you can solve a problem for your community, you've got a global solution there. And so I think we often, the things that I love about the regions are often also the things that will stop us from reaching, you know, what we can do, and so maybe how to be a bit not more ambitious, but just realise that what we're doing is pretty remarkable. Not
so self-limiting in the potential value or impact that we're having. Yep. What does Julia need more of in 2025?
Well, Julia is looking at her 2025 picture over here on the wall, and I have my thing that I need more of in 2025 is small wins. So the phrase I've got, Tanya, is small wins will help me achieve what's important overall. Regular, consistent routines are a gift to support me to have a great life. So that is what I need in 2025.
And I love that you've got it written up there, though, so that daily you're going to be seeing it, reading it, absorbing it. Love it.
That's the plan. January might have been a practice month, but I'm right on it in February.
Every journey starts with a single step, and even if it stops, it starts again with another single step.
I love it. Good one, Sensei. That's a good one.
Sorry?
That's a good one.
I'll let you get back to it, Jules, but thank you for making time and sharing your story with us on Built in the Bush. I'm sure that there'll be lots of people that can take some things from it and hopefully be inspired to follow their dream or build their business or whatever it is that lights them up.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's my hope. That's my hope for the conversation with you. And I just want to acknowledge and thank you for the work that you're doing, getting these stories out. This is part of what we need in the bush. So well done for what you're doing.
Thank you. Happy to. I'm just I just want people to know it's not my podcasting abilities. It's as long as you get the story through. That's what 100%. We're aiming for with this, because there's just so many amazing people in regional Australia doing great things that people don't even know about.
Yeah, absolutely. And you don't know the ripples of impact that you're going to have as a result of this yet. And I think that's the wonderful thing that podcast can bring is you'll interview somebody that none of us, who none of us have heard of before, and that will send us all down a way of learning more and being more aware of what's out there. So I think it's fantastic. Well done.
Thanks, Jules. Pleasure to have you and always good to catch up. We'll let you get back to your day.
Thank you.
Yeah.